Every morning I pass his small house at the edge of town, where the porch paint has faded into the color of old postcards, and the wind chimes speak in careful whispers. The blinds are always half drawn, as if the rooms inside are letting in only what they can bear. I have learned his rhythm without meaning to. A kettle breathes on the stove just after sunrise. The radio crackles to a station that plays the songs of people who remember. He moved slowly between window and chair, a tide that rises and falls with the strength of the day. He taught at the neighborhood school long before I moved here. I can tell by the neat rows of books that line his living room and the way his hand still traces letters on the armrest, as if the air were a blackboard and memory were chalk. His wife left this world a few winters ago, and her absence lingers like a scent that will not leave the doorway. The photographs on the mantel seem heavier than frames should be. In some, she is laughing. In others, a hand rests on his shoulder with the ease of someone who knew exactly where to anchor him. I have seen how loneliness rearranges a life. It pulls the chairs farther from the table. It turns meals into obligations and silence into a second skin. Some afternoons I find the newspaper still folded on his step, untouched as the day turns to dusk. On Sundays he waters the same patch of earth with a care that looks like prayer. The neighbors wave from their cars, and he answers with a nod that is almost a bow, a quiet way of saying that he is still here even if the world has grown large around him. Once I left a container of soup at his door with a note that did not ask for a reply. Later, the container came back, washed, and placed carefully on my stoop with a napkin folded into a neat square. There is a dignity in his solitude that I do not want to bruise. I think about the weight of memories and how they can feel like stones in a coat, heavy yet impossible to put down. I watch him sit on the porch steps some evenings, hands folded, gaze fixed on a horizon that offers no answers. Even so, there is a softness in the way he waits, not for anything grand, perhaps only for a small sign that the world remembers him, the way a candle waits for the touch of a match, patient and full of quiet light. It was on one of those late afternoons, when the sun melted into a tired orange, that the visitor came. A stray cat, thin and cautious, padded onto his porch as though it had been there 100 times before. Its fur was uneven, a patchwork of nights spent wandering, and its tail flicked with a mix of suspicion and hope. The old man, set in his chair with the stillness of stone, lowered his gaze to the creature that now sat just a few feet away. For a long while, neither moved. The air was thick with a silence that felt like introduction. The next day the cat returned, curling into a ball at the edge of the porch. He shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, as if to remind himself he wanted no company. Yet the animal did not leave. Instead, it blinked slowly, eyes heavy with a kind of trust he hadn't seen in years. He tried shooing it once, clapping his hands, but it only stretched, as though the sound were a lullaby instead of a dismissal. Days passed, and the cat remained. It was always there, waiting, as though the house belonged to both of them. The old man eventually left scraps of food at the step, his hands reluctant but his heart betraying him with quiet generosity. He would shake his head, grumbling that he didn't need a cat. Still, each morning, he checked to see if it had returned, and each time he found it there, a warmth slipped into the cracks of his chest. One evening, he spoke aloud, his voice unsure. He told the cat about his wife, about the way she used to hum while cooking, about the sound of her laughter that still echoed in the walls. The cat, silent and unbothered, simply listened in its way, tail swaying lightly as though marking the rhythm of his sorrow. It did not ask questions, did not judge, did not interrupt, and somehow, that was enough. He began to linger longer on the porch, his stories pouring out slowly, like water finally released from a clogged spring. He spoke of his students, the way their voices once filled his classroom, the chalk dust that clung to his sleeves like snow. He confessed his fear of being forgotten, of leaving no trace beyond photographs that would one day gather dust. And the cat stayed, each day, each hour, reminding him that his words still found a listener. What struck me most was not the companionship itself, but the way it softened him. His shoulders, once weighed down by silence, began to lift. His eyes, dulled by years of emptiness, found a spark in the smallest gestures, the twitch of whiskers, the purr that rose like a soft engine in the quiet. He did not realize it then, but the cat was teaching him to believe again in presence, in connection, in the simple truth that no life is ever truly unseen. Then came the morning when the porch was empty. The chair sat alone in the pale light, and the bowl he had placed near the steps remained untouched. He waited, eyes searching the street, his hands restless on the armrest. Hours passed. Evening arrived. Still no sign of the cat. The silence pressed harder than it had in years, heavier than the days before the animal ever appeared. For the first time, he understood just how much space that small creature had filled in his life. The next day was the same. He rose early, poured 2 cups of tea instead of 1, and set one aside as though the cat might suddenly decide to drink. But the chair beside him remained vacant. He tried to tell himself it was only a stray, a wanderer destined to move on. Yet his chest ached with the familiar sting of loss. It was as though the wound of his wife's absence had been pried open again. He whispered into the empty air, words meant for the cat but carrying the weight of all his fears. Maybe he was forgettable. Maybe love never lingered long. On the 3rd evening, when hope had almost faded, a familiar shadow appeared at the edge of the porch. Thin paws, tired steps, eyes that glowed faintly under the porch light. The old man's breath caught, and he let out a trembling laugh that broke into tears. The cat rubbed against his leg, as though it had never left, as though absence were just another way of reminding him how much presence meant. He reached down, his hand shaking, and for the first time he allowed himself to touch its fur. Soft, warm, alive. That night, something changed. He no longer spoke to the cat as though it were a stranger, but as though it were an anchor keeping him steady. He told it not only of the past but of tomorrow, of how he would plant flowers again in the garden, of how he might invite the neighbors in for tea. His words carried not sorrow, but a quiet promise to keep living. I saw him weeks later, sitting on the porch as always, the cat curled against his side, both of them gazing at the horizon. His face carried lines of age, but also a softness, a peace I had never seen before. He was no longer a man swallowed by silence. He was someone who had found meaning in the company of another soul, no matter how small, no matter how unlikely. In the end, the cat gave him no grand lesson, no profound speech. It simply stayed, and sometimes, staying is enough to heal what loneliness cannot. Loneliness often builds its walls quietly, brick by brick, until a person believes nothing can climb them. But sometimes, the smallest presence, a stray cat, a gentle gesture, an unexpected companion slips through the cracks and changes everything. The elder learned that even when the world feels empty, life still offers connection in ways we cannot predict. His story reminds us that love is not always loud or grand. Sometimes it is simply the act of showing up, again and again, until a heart begins to heal. If this story touched you, I invite you to reflect on those small presences in your own life. And if you feel moved, share this story with someone who might need its light. Like, comment, and subscribe to Mindset Tales for more heartfelt stories that remind us of the quiet strength within the human spirit.